Hey guys, welcome back to Keys of the Cosmos. This is part 2 in my series of planetary imaging. Hopefully you're able to catch part 1. We basically gave an overview of planetary imaging, how it differs from deep space if that's what you're used to, and we talked all about the equipment that you need for planetary. And once that's all been done, we move into part 2, which is all about the software and programs that you need not only to capture your data, but also, of course, to stack and to process it. So in this video, we're going to talk about 3 main programs. The great thing is that all 3 are free. You gotta love that about astrophotography. So many people work so hard to provide these for us. And so it's great to have all these programs available to us in order to do things like planetary imaging. So I'm obviously not going to go through all the processes. This video would be like 4 hours long. We're going to try to keep this as short as possible. And one thing I have to apologize right off the bat, I actually don't have my planetary camera available with me right now, so I'm not able to connect it and show you everything, but I will show you through some sort of screenshots from the internet, and it's really not that complicated, but I would have loved to have it on me, but unfortunately it's not available. But we're going to run through it anyway, and you'll get the gist. It's really not that complicated at all, and if I'm able to figure it out, trust me, anyone is able to. So, you've collected the equipment that you need, and now you want to go out and do some planetary imaging. Well, you're going to need a program in order to collect that data. Now, the ASI Air does do that now. It's come a long way. I've never personally used it for planetary. I know that you can. I'm just showing you the way that I did it. I generally don't love bringing out my laptop on your average deep sky night. But for planetary, as I mentioned in the first video, because it's a much shorter night, I don't mind, even if it's a cold night. If your battery's topped up, you should be fine. You're not going to be out there for hours on end, at least hopefully not anyway, if things go smoothly. So I don't mind bringing my laptop out just to do planetary. So basically, if you're doing it the way I do, you're going to have your camera in your eyepiece of your telescope, and then the camera is a cord that connects in the back of it, and that runs into your laptop, if that's what you're using, via USB. Now, one thing I want to mention before we talk about the first program, you're going to want to download the driver for your particular camera. So if you're using a ZWO, for instance, you can just Google ZWO camera drivers. It'll take you to their website. You look for the camera that you need. You click on it, quick download, and you're ready to go. So don't forget to do that, because otherwise you're going to load the program here and you're going to wonder why your camera's not showing up. It's because most likely because you didn't download the driver. The other thing I want to mention before we talk about the specifics is that these will be big files. Maybe there is a way to compress them that I'm not aware of, quite likely, but I'm just telling you, these are very big AVI files. The last one I did was 24 gig, and that was just one capture of Saturn, about 12,000 frames. So make sure you have room on your laptop. If not, you could always use an external hard drive and just have your images directed to there. And that's sort of an easy way to get around that if you don't have a lot of room on your laptop. But keep that in mind. They will be big files, and if you don't have room, your computer is going to be telling you pretty quickly that you're running out of room, and basically the program will just stop capturing. So make sure those 2 things are in place, the driver for the camera, and then you have room in your computer. Let's talk about the first program. It's called SharpCap. Now this is version 4. I believe it's the newest version. SharpCap does a couple other things. It's not just for this, but in the free version that I have, I think most people use it specifically for capturing, planetary. It'll do deep spaces, of course, as well, but I use it for planetary. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not able to connect my camera, but I can still run it through with you, sort of the main menu options that you're going to want to do in order to get you going on capturing your data. So basically, once you download the driver and you've connected your camera, you go up at the top here under cameras, and your camera should show up here. Should say the name, your computer recognizes it, the software recognizes it. You just click on it, and then you should see a live view. If you're not seeing that, it's probably because you didn't download the driver, or there's a loose connection, something's not connected, but it should work every time where it recognizes the camera and will show you a live view. So now from there, you're going to want to do your focusing. That's obviously done on the telescope itself. But on the right hand side, and it's not showing because they don't have a camera connected, but I can show you on the screenshot is your sort of your settings for the camera. And the only thing that I really mess around with is going to be your gain. Okay, so that's going to sort of brighten or darken. If you find it's very dark, then you might want to increase your gain. Now there's always auto gain, but you have a manual option as well. There's usually a few other settings that you might want to play around with, but I kept it pretty simple and I found that it was fine. It also allows you to adjust what kind of format, so I leave it at AVI files. Again, that's a standard setting. And you can fool around with, but without doing research, I wouldn't. But you can fool around with, the size of the images and stuff like that. But to be honest, I left it the way it was. Other than messing around with the gain a little, um, I found it was fine just the way it was. So that's really all there is of Sharp Cap. It's just a matter of getting your camera connected and then making sure that the image on here looks the way you want it to. But most of that is done with the focus on your telescope. Now, once you're ready to go, all you do is I use capture up at the top, start capture, and then it'll ask you, the box will pop up and it'll say how many frames do you want to take, or you have the option not to specify, which is what the option that I do. I just let it go, and then when I feel it's good, I'll stop it. You can see up here it clearly says stop capture, or you can just hit this quick capture and it'll just start recording right away. I leave the settings as is. It tells you you have the option to adjust how many frames you're taking per second and all that, or frames per minute. I forget what it is, but I leave it on stock settings, and I found that it was just fine. You can specify a target name so that it saves it that way in your computer. And yeah, it's pretty simple. So I recommend doing maybe a test, start capturing, see how it goes. Is your target staying in the field of view? Is it moving around? And maybe you need to make adjustments with your rig, your telescope, your mount, whatever it is. But for the most part, you want your target to be staying as still as possible. As we talked about in part one, that it is going to go in and out of focus. That's just our atmosphere. There's nothing you can do about that. And that's why, as we talked about, what we call it lucky imaging. We're taking thousands of frames, maybe even tens of thousands, and we're using a small percentage of just those sharp in focus images, and then we're going to stack them. But the more you take, the better. I mean, you don't need to go crazy, but I recommend anywhere, around 10,000 frames or more should do the trick, especially if you have nice conditions that you're imaging it. So once it's done, it'll save automatically. It'll tell you where it saves. I'm sure you can specify that. But even if you're not sure, it tells you at the top, saved, and it'll tell you what folder it's in. And that, again, will be in an AVI file. And so it's basically like a movie file, and that's why it's so big. In my case, the last one, as I mentioned, 24 gig. But that's really SharpCap as far as keeping it simple and just using it to capture your data. And as I said, if you do the time, take the time to set everything up right, this should not take very long at all. So now, once you have your data, you have your AVI file, then we're going to switch to a program called AutoStacker. Okay, and AutoStacker, if I just lower this here, and I minimize that. Sorry for all the things on my desktop. But basically, here's where you're going to get with AutoStacker. You're going to get two different windows on the left and the right. So the first step, obviously, is to open. You're going to open your AVI file that you just took using SharpCap. Open. And we're going to try and find our image here. There it is. There's our Saturn. And just get it roughly centered. Now on the right hand side, since we're here anyway, basically here's all your frames. Okay, so this is frame number 1, but you can slowly run through it. There it is. You can see that the effects of that atmosphere that it had on these frames. And if you go all the way to the end, you can see I had 12,269 frames. So pick a frame that's decent. I like this one. You can even see a bit of separation in the rings. And this is the one we're going to work with as an example anyway. Now, one thing I like to do while we're on the right side is you're going to draw some alignment points. Now, alignment points are basically key points that the program is going to use to identify and stack. So I like to do manual, and when you hit manual, you just sort of hold down and make a box, and in the center of that box there will be, you click and there's a red dot. Okay, so I like to pick key points, sort of I focus on the rings. If you had a planet, say like Jupiter with a great red spot, that would probably be one that you click on. But to be honest, it's sort of random. I don't put too many uh, because I don't think that's beneficial if you put too many, but just sort of key spots. I didn't go crazy the first time I did this, and it seemed to work just fine. So we'll just sort of leave it maybe here and leave it at that. Now, focusing on the left side, what's nice about this program is it basically runs you through step by step. So there's 1, 2, 3 steps. Now we've already opened our file. Basically, for the settings that it provides for you, I left them the way they are. There are videos on YouTube where they go into great detail and they'll explain what all of them are. I'm not going to do that. Make sure this is obviously selected. We're obviously imaging a planet, so that's selected. This I leave checked. This I leave checked. I leave it at 5. Okay, some people say move it to 6, some people lower, but 5 was fine for me. I kept it at local. And then we go to analyze. So basically, now it's going to analyze. This is where you also want to have this selected before you do it. You hit analyze, and it's going to analyze all of those frames. And depending how many frames you are, it's going to take, shorter or longer time to replay this out in here. Now, obviously, we don't have time to do that, but I do want to show you. This is a screenshot from the last time I did it. So here it's just been analyzed, and here is your what's called your quality graph. And this is what you want to see. This is basically all your data, and you want this line to be running down the center of it as much as possible. You can see at some points it's basically right at the edge, and same with here, but you see a good chunk of it is going right down the center, and that's what you want. If you find that you're not getting the greatest tracking and your target is moving a lot, you're going to find that your line is not going down the center, and maybe you're only hitting certain parts of it, and that's where you're going to struggle a little bit more with quality data to work with. So that's why it's so important to make sure that your rig is working well, that it's a decent night, as far as the sky conditions and all that, and make sure that it looks something similar to this, because that's going to affect your stacking options. So assuming it looks decent, like this, we're going to go back to that program. Here we are. And once it's been analyzed, we go to the stacking options. Now we're going to save this as a TIFF file. And I usually keep all of these checked. But here in the number of frames to stack, so here you have 4 options. And then also, of course, your percentage. Now, you can do all 4, and it'll actually do the process 4 times and provide you with 4 different images. It takes a long time, and depending on your computer, it can be a lot of computing power necessary. So I like to do 1 at a time. And to be honest with you, I've tried a bunch of different things. And unless you go like 100% or something really high, I don't find there's a huge difference. Again, it will depend on the results of when it analyzes. If you found that your line isn't really going down the center as we talked about, and it's sort of all over the place, you're probably going to want to stack a smaller percentage, okay, and maybe not use all your frames. But if you find that it is good and the quality's there, then you might want to go up to something like 40%. But as you saw when I went through the frames, some of them are just plain out of focus, and it's just the atmosphere that's creating that. So you don't want to use all of them. The whole idea of this is you take way more than you need and then let the program select the best ones. And you can help determine that by this number. So in my case, I did 40% because I thought the data was decent, and it produced a decent result. So I was happy with it. But that, again, that's something that will be particular to your data and that you may have to play with. The drizzle here at the bottom I turned off. I've never used drizzle. I've only ever done it once with deep sky, and I found that it took forever and used a ton of memory, so I just don't bother. And then all you do is you hit the third thing here's stack, and it'll go through the process, and hopefully there's no problems, and it'll spit out a nice TIFF file for you to take to the next step. Now I just want to mention a fourth very briefly here. There is a fourth program that you may need If you found that your data is not the greatest, especially if your tracking was not great, there's a program called PIP. Okay, PIPP. Again, it's free like the other three. And basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. You select planetary, and there's a few options, but basically all you're going to do is you're going to add in your AVI file. Okay, so this is to be done before AutoStacker. And if sort of your target was moving through each frame and it's in a different spot in each frame, pip will sort of clean that up. It'll crop it, it'll center it for each individual frame of your AVI file, and it just sort of does an extra step of processing before you go into AutoStacker. So most of the time it probably won't be necessary, but I'm just telling you, if you're using like an old mount that wasn't doing a great job, or you're manually tracking, pip is a great free program to sort of clean up those individual uh, files, and then gives you nice centered files to be able to load into AutoStacker as an AVI file. So just something to keep in mind. But pip, I did use it once to see, and it worked great. For my Jupiter image, it cleaned it up really nice, and AutoStacker did a much better job, and it did it much faster as well. So that's basically it for AutoStacker, keeping it simple. You may need to problem solve here and there if it sends you an error message, but there's a lot of information out there if you come across that you should be able to figure it out. Again, it'll save it for you. And so now you have a saved TIFF file. And now we're going to go into the final program, and that is Registax. Okay, this is the game changer. This is the one I never used the first time I did Planetary, and no doubt one of many reasons that it was terrible. But this Registax is amazing. The first time I tried, I got that TIFF file from AutoStacker, and I just went right to Photoshop because that's what I did for Deep Space. But it's not that you can't use Photoshop, but I really recommend, I can't recommend it strong enough, use Registax, in particular the Wavelet tab here. Now, as you can see, Registax will align and stack just like AutoStacker. And depending who you talk to, it might be better or worse, but most people I find use AutoStacker to stack and Registax to do the processing. So that's what I did, and I was happy with the results. So you're going to select, you're going to open your file, okay, and it says Jupiter, but it's actually Saturn. Stretch intensity levels, yes. And there is our Saturn. A little bit blurry, but recognizable. So here's where we're going to clean it up. Now, again, there are videos like 20 minutes just on this here, 20-30 minutes just on this here. I'm just going to show you what I did, very simple. I went on this right side, RGB balance. I think I went to auto balance. I always think of Saturn as being more of a beige color, but you can play with that, and the reds, greens, and blues. And if you're not happy with the way it looks, obviously you can just reset it and start again, or say, no, leave it the way it was. Some people play with the histogram. If it's something you're not really familiar with, I would say leave it. But you can play around with it, and again, you have the option to reset. And so that makes it super simple. And go back to what you have. You can flip and rotate, which might be handy if you want to move something around or flip it around. That's really all I've ever really fooled around with. Denoise, I've heard some people use it. I've never really. Again, if it's your first time, I'd say keep it simple and watch what happens even when you just use these main controls. But I'm just showing you there are a lot of functions here, as they're called, that you can play around with. But the main part is on the left side. Now I'm going to show you the way that I did it, and I will say one thing. Just be careful. You don't want to overdo these because it may look good with the small picture here, but when you go to put it on Photoshop or you go to send it to your phone or wherever you're going to post it, you're going to find that you may have overdone it a bit. So tread lightly with some of these. So here I just want to show you how I did. So this top one here, layer 1, I just sort of brought it close to the top, and you can see already huge difference. Now you can clearly see the separation of the rings. You can see more detail in Saturn itself. The second one, not as far, but again, slight improvement. We want subtle, slight improvements. The third one, I moved over just a bit. So you can see it's sort of like a gradual line. And these ones I really didn't touch too much. You see, if you start bringing them all up, it may look good to you on here. particularly that one I just did, but you can see it's over sharpened. And you almost get the reverse. You get more like a fuzzy look to it. And when you go to put that on, as I mentioned, Photoshop, whatever, it's not going to look right. And you're going to need to come back and adjust it. So this is how I would start something like this. And then, again, save it, throw it in Photoshop, see what it looks like. Look at it on your phone, wherever you're going to share, and make sure you're happy with it. But this is sort of where you're going to make your biggest adjustments. And do little ones at a time and make sure, that you're happy with it and not overdoing it. But that's basically it. You can see what a difference in just seconds. It cleans that what once was very blurry and sharpens it up beautifully. And then of course you have the option to go to Photoshop. You can, sharpen it more there. You can play with colors a little bit, but you don't need to do the bulk of it in Photoshop. It should be very quick. The main part is done in Registax, and what a game changer. You see how easy that was. The first time I fooled around for a long time in Photoshop trying to even achieve half of these results. And you got to remember, as I talked in part one, I'm using just an 8-inch telescope, which okay, it has a decent amount of focal length, but no Barlow. And we're talking about Saturn here, which is a lot smaller than Jupiter. So this was not a really zoomed in image. So in order to even get these details, I was really happy with it. The more focal length, assuming it's again quality data, you're going to get even more detail, even more separation in the rings. But for something that was not a ton of focal length on a pretty small object, I think this is pretty good. You can, as I mentioned, you can always clean it up a little bit more in other programs, but this does the bulk of the work. And again, a free program, you gotta love that. It really is a game changer. So Registax, amazing, does a great job. But fool around with it, as I mentioned. If you really like to get into this stuff, you can watch other YouTube videos where they get into crazy detail about all of these settings. But this is just sort of how I did it, and you can see the difference it made immediately. But that's basically it, guys. Those are the main programs you're going to use for the capturing and processing side of Planetary. Um, even if it's a cloudy night, go ahead, download all the programs you need. As I mentioned, download the driver to the camera you're going to be using. Get it all ready, and then when you even just have a small window, you can get out there, get your set up, and try to take a quick video of one of the planets or whatever it is you're doing, and just sort of get used to this. That way you have a little bit of data that you can play around with. And then when you have a proper night, when you can get out there and take 12,000, 15,000 frames, you can really go out and get a really nice image. We know that Mars is coming up soon. It's currently November, but December Mars will be at opposition. I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be the next time I get out. But you can use this for lunar photography. These are amazing programs that just do a great job, and I've really enjoyed doing Planetary. I'm so glad I sort of took a break from Deep Sky and tried this. I really enjoyed it, and as I mentioned, I'm looking forward to Mars in about a month. So hopefully this helped, guys. If you haven't tried it, get out there, try some Planetary Imaging. It's a lot of fun, and it's amazing to take your own images of those planets uh, that we're so familiar with. But I really enjoyed it, and I hope this video helps you in doing so. But as always, guys, I'm going to have my final image of Jupiter, or of Saturn, at the end of this video. But thank you as always. I appreciate the support, and feel free to drop any comments or questions under my video here. But thanks as always, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.